All right, welcome to the investor market update for New South Wales. And today I have Pat from Rubik's Realty joining me. Pat, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, we had a second person, but she is unfortunately not well today. But I'm sure we'll get all the information we need from you. Now, we've got a few people attending today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat and I will ask Pat, or you can ask myself as we go along. So, Pat, can you just let everyone know just a little bit about you and the area that you work in as well?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a property manager. I've been in the industry 23 years straight out of school. It'll be 15 years this July since I opened Rubik's Realty. And we cover around the Maitland area in the Hunter Valley. So basically any suburbs within 30 minutes of Maitland, we'll look after for investor clients.
And as someone who doesn't know the area, is this regional? How far away out of Sydney are you guys
Oh.
located?
So 2 hours north of Sydney and then 30 minutes west of Newcastle. So yeah, most people I guess would know Newcastle. So yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And have you, in the last, four-ish years, when we've seen this big investor movement, particularly interstate, have you seen that in your area? Is it yet to come? What does that look like?
So my experience in the last 4 years has actually been existing clients selling because the market, peaked. But in the last probably 2 years, I've seen people, we get a lot of people from Sydney, they look at our prices, and you can get a new house and land package or an existing home for between 7 and 800,000. In some areas, you can buy in for less. And I guess from a Sydney perspective, they sort of see what you can get for that money, see the return, and like, wow, and it's only 2 hours north of Sydney, and then 30 minutes from the coast of Newcastle. So, yeah.
And are they buying properties for the purpose of investing or more likely to buy it as a lifestyle change?
For investing, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's and we've got land releases, so there's a lot of house and land packages as well, which I guess if you're a busy person working, family, that sort of thing, a house and land package might be the easier option, to be able to get into the market.
Yeah. And what sort of rents? So you mentioned that $800,000 mark, assuming it's like a 4x2. What sort of rents would you be getting on that type of property?
So
Rough.
for 4 bedrooms in our area, you're probably looking at 620 to 650 is probably a fairly sort of stable range. And then depending what side of town you're on, east side of Maitland tends to get a higher rent return. But anywhere up to 750 and for something really special, even nudging that $800 a week. But the buy-in to get that 800 return would sort of be around that up towards 1 million. So between 7 and 800, you'd be looking between 6 and 700 return per week.
Yeah. And just so I can sort of, a lot of these questions I ask are all selfish questions because I genuinely am curious. And if I'm curious, it means other people are curious. Uh,
Yeah.
but what's the ideal tenant in those areas as well? Like, what do they move there for? What do they live there for?
Yeah, so we've got we're about anywhere from 40 to minutes to an hour drive to the mining industry in the Hunter Valley. So we get a lot of people who are, working that mining industry. So they tend to be on the west side of town because it's closer for them. Um, so generally you get families, but you also get it's quite a mixed bag. So I've got sort of tenants who singles on their own, single parents, and then you've got families and that sort of thing. So it's quite a broad range. But the majority of what I manage is, your 4 bedroom family homes. In most cases, both are working. And you might find that someone's in the mines and then someone might be in Newcastle. So we've got the Hunter Expressway, which is sort of a link road between the Hunter Valley up north and then Newcastle off to the east. So it's sort of, you find quite a few suburbs that puts them fairly in the middle of both sort of areas, which is, pretty convenient.
That makes sense. If you could be sort of an hour out of Newcastle, but then an hour away from the mines, that would be, yeah, really desirable.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so generally with New South Wales and legislation over there, one thing we do try to do is make sure that investors know that it's very state specific and not just to assume that just because legislation is one way in WA, it's going to be the same everywhere else. Have you guys had any recent sort of changes that have been significant for investors to know?
Yeah, so we have changes coming in on the 18th of May. So the biggest change is probably removing the no grounds termination notice, which is going, and then lengthening some of the notice periods. So it just sort of means that if you want your property back, there's very specific reasons why or how you can get that back, but you've also got to provide proof. So, if you're selling the property and you want it vacant possession, that's fairly easy to prove. Like, here's my signed sales agency agreement. But in cases where a family member or the owner themselves is moving in, I'm kind of at a loss at the moment. How do you prove it? I've got clients and they own a property and they're, reaching that retirement age. So there's one out of three owners who they're going to do an ownership swap on multiple properties and that's going to become his property. But he already lives locally with other family members. So it's sort of like, well, how does he prove that he's actually going to move into that property? Because in most cases, if I have an owner, or currently and previously, if an owner said, "Hey, I'm going to move into the property," we'd issue the notice, tell the tenant this is why, and then it'd just be a waiting game until the tenant found a new home to move into. Whereas now it's sort of, well, I guess proof would be booking a removalist, but he doesn't can't book a removalist because he doesn't have a date. He's not moving from out of the area to the area, so it's sort of one of those. I guess we just have to see what sort of pans out and what becomes the precedent to be able to advise that notice. And another tricky one is I've got quite a few owners who are just really handy, and over the years they've put new bathrooms or new kitchens in. But how do they prove that that's the major renovation they're going to do? If they're doing it themselves, they're not going to have a contract to say this is what we're doing and this is when it starts. So it's sort of there's a few queries I've got already based on some of my existing clients on how we're going to, when the time comes, if the time comes, how we're going to navigate getting possession of their property back for different purposes. So that'll be interesting. And also pets in property. So an owner won't be allowed to refuse a pet unless on specific grounds. It's also said that we can write in additional conditions to the agreement to allow a pet, but I'm sure a tenant at the end of the lease could go to tribunal to dispute one of those, additional conditions, and it's going to depend on the member at tribunal whether they say, I don't think that was reasonable. So then you've written something that was worthless. So they're the two biggest changes that are coming in, from May this year. So
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, pets we've had start over here, and I don't think anyone in WA was that worried about it because best practice was that you allow pets. So it's
yeah,
all been pretty smooth. That has been. The no grounds termination, I think, is a big one because I think it also, with that new legislation, that's one that I definitely don't want to come into WA. Because I've had times where we have evicted a tenant, not because they've looked after the property, paid their rent, but they've actually been a liability for the owner in other senses.
yes,
And it's like if you keep this lady in, she's going to sue you for something. She'll find something to sue you for, and it's like we just don't want that. So it's
yeah,
like, but it's hard to prove, but
yes,
it's a risk. So that scares me a lot, but it also takes me to the point that if you're going to have a no grounds, if you're going to not allowed, no grounds terminations, then what's the point of even having a fixed lease? Like,
Yes.
why don't we just have leases that start on a date and don't even have an end date? I mean, is that something that's been in any conversations?
No, so it's yeah, and it's so easy for a tenant to break a lease. So I'm not sure about WA, but in New South Wales, if a tenant, if they sign a 12-month lease and then 2 months in, for whatever reason they want to get out, the maximum penalty is 4 weeks rent. They pay rent up until the day they return the keys, plus a 4-week break fee, which is then on a sliding scale depending on the term left, down to 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and 1 week. And I've had so many tenants in the last quarter of their agreement. So, we send out notice, hey, your lease is expiring. Do you want to renew or not? And you're sort of prompting them to go, oh, do I want to stay here or not? And they can give you 1 week's break fee, no notice, and get out of their lease, before so there's really no, I don't know, 1 week's rent's obviously could be a lot of money to someone, but to someone else, it's sort of like, well, I don't have to give 3 weeks notice. I can just
Mm.
up and go. And, so there's no, I don't feel like it's fair in that respect that an owner has a lot of hoops to jump through to get their property back for whatever reason, but a tenant can go, oh, I don't want to be here anymore, and get out early. And something I've been doing for probably over 10 years is if we have tenants move in sort of towards the end of November or anytime in December, we'll do the next lease to end in the following January. So get past that Christmas and New Year's. And that doesn't do anything anymore. If a tenant wants to get out of their lease, they can do it. I had someone vacate Christmas Eve last year, which was a break lease, and then we didn't get it rented till January, so it was vacant for over 2 weeks because people don't want to move at that time of year. So
No.
it kind of made it really easy for a tenant to get out of a lease, but for an owner, there's a lot more hoops to jump through, I guess you'd say. So
So I think um, the new legislations that come through, I feel are it's really important, as I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, as a property manager or someone in real estate, to be providing confidence to the investor market that it is going to be okay, so that we don't have investors scared from investing. So I
yeah.
know, and I feel like in WA, we were all pretty confident. However, I think we also were lucky with our legislation changes that we were all on board. We actually agreed with a lot of them, and we provided our market with a lot of confidence and our landlords with a lot of confidence to say, you know what, this is actually okay. This is best practice anyway. So and not necessarily you, but is there anything that the real estate community is doing to provide confidence to investors to continue investing? Or do you think that this could be a real shift, with people even getting out even more?
Um, I think it might push some people to get out as opposed to stopping people from getting in. I think it might push someone to make that decision to get out of the market sooner. Someone who's maybe approaching retirement but wasn't planning to sell for 2 or 3 years, they might sort of go, well, you know what, let's sort of sell now. But I think the example you used before, where someone pays their rent on time, looks after the property, but they're an issue, that's going to be the one that's really going to test how you're going to get possession of the property back. So I sent out, once the amendments came through last week, because there's been talk about it and, bits and pieces have been dripped fed to us, but they finally came out with the amendments. And I sent a bulk email to all my clients in my database to let them know. And the feedback from them was around some who'd been previously with property managers before they moved over to Rubik's, or might have a property somewhere else in New South Wales managed by someone else. And they're like, oh, we've never had this before. We've not been made aware of it. And it was like a long document, and I sort of highlighted the key points. I guess a lot of it's going to be, it's not an issue until it becomes one. So, oh, well, we plan to hold the property long term. And then all of a sudden the time comes to get vacant possession. It's sort of like, well, how do we how do we go about that? And one of the things is once you've issued termination to your tenant and got vacant possession, you can't re-let that property for 6 months without requesting permission from the commissioner to be able to do that. So, for example, let's say you're like, you know what, I need to sell the property. You issue the notice to the tenants and it doesn't sell because not all owners are going to be able to hold a property, indefinitely without rent coming in to help cover those outgoing costs. And so if you sort of get to that, 3, 4 months and nothing's happening, you're getting offers, but they're not where you need it to be to make it worthwhile to sell, you then have to ask permission to relet your property. Major renovations, the property has to be vacant for a minimum of 4 weeks to relet. So, if you're getting a bathroom or kitchen done, which might be needed, your waterproofing might have failed and it's the only bathroom in the property. So your only option is to get vacant possession to do that bathroom. But you might have really good trades who are in and out within a fortnight. You can't relet that property for another 2 weeks. So, and basically, it's just sort of, I guess, to stop people from being dodgy and saying, oh, we've got to do this or that. But it's like anything, I guess. The minority ruin it for the majority. But yeah, it's kind of crazy if you've invested $700,000, $800,000 on a property and you want to sell it, and then suddenly, you've got to ask permission to, you know, relet that. And I don't know how long that process will be. I don't know what the process will be for that. But that's where I think people kind of get annoyed because they're being controlled in what they can do with their money, basically. And no one likes to, be controlled financially, but here these people are, and they're being controlled financially through legislation. And I get the idea is to prevent and reduce homelessness, but it's very skewed one way, in my opinion, and it's not necessarily benefiting the people who are putting their money into the market because the government won't supply the housing for them. So,
Which is exactly the same in a lot of states.
yeah,
The government's just not moving quick enough with the houses. I mean, they can say all they want that, oh, we've got this much of a budget, but it's like, yeah, you can have whatever budget you want, but you don't have the tradies and the manpower and the
yeah,
time to actually do it. So it means nothing.
no,
It's
that's right.
it's really interesting legislation. It's such a big factor, yet I don't know who considers it at maybe the top of their priority when it comes to being an investor. I know I've got Julie Crockett in here who, teaches and coaches buyers agents, and Julie and I maybe have a discussion later on about this. But it's interesting to know at what point on the pecking scale is legislation taken into account when investing? Are they prioritizing that to choose the area, or are they not? I mean, I guess it probably makes sense that they don't. They go on the data and analytics first, and then that they just cope with. But I just feel like there's a lot of government interference, and if you just let things go their natural cycle, we're going to have ups, we're going to have
Yeah,
downs. Just let it roll out. Don't interrupt that natural cycle, and it will all be fine. And sometimes it's in the owner's benefit, and sometimes it's in the tenant's benefit, and
yeah.
all swings back.
Oh, that's
Um,
right.
but I think making sure, like I know it's a big thing for me, making sure that landlords are not doing anything dodgy and calling them out if they are, so that we are not put in a position where some of these changes might need to be put in place because of the minority work, like you said. So for me, that's a really big importance for property managers everywhere to make
Yeah,
sure your landlords are doing the right thing. And if you're watching this as a landlord, do the right thing because there's a big picture at stake. So
oh, definitely.
I mean, and then you said about how it's there to protect the tenants. What are you seeing at home opens? Are we getting is there a massive shortage? How many people come through a home open? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I've not experienced the 30 or 40 or 100 people lined up down the street looking at one property to come through. I actually had an open home on Friday. The tenant vacated, and it was our first open. And I'd rang 14 people. So our process is to ring anyone who inquires and then follow up with an email. And out of 14 inquiries on the property, I had two people through on Friday afternoon. So, like your post about Saturday inspections, it's sort of, I don't think it's a priority for a lot of people unless they have to be out of the property for whatever reason, and it's sort of whenever I've given notice to a tenant, whether it's the 30 days for exchange because the property is sold or, the 90 days no grounds, I always say to an owner, it's very much like a school project. You're going to have the tenants who are out within a week or two, and then you're going to have the tenants who come down to crunch time and say, I need more time to be able to get out, sort of thing. And I guess being given notice to vacate, you've got to process it mentally as well, especially if you're not sort of expecting it, regardless of the reason why, the owner's requesting possession back. But, yeah, it's like a school project. Some people are going to be out within a week and other people are going to be out beyond the 90 days. So, yeah, I haven't been knocked down with, like, if it's something quite unique or in a really popular area, then yeah, definitely I get probably up to 10 or 12 people has probably been the maximum. But that's over a 30-minute showing. So, they're not all lined up out the front, right at the start. They sort of come in dribs and drabs, but it's not, yeah, I don't think it's a huge priority in our area for people to move unless they have to be out for a specific reason.
And does the media suggest
Mhm.
otherwise in your area, like, in New South Wales as a whole?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And it makes the job quite difficult because you'll contact the owner to say, hey, your tenant's moving out. And they're like, oh, what sort of rent do you think we'll get? And that won't take long to lease, will it? Because of the housing crisis. And it's like, let's have a serious conversation about my experience in our area. And even speaking to other agents, even in Newcastle and the Central Coast, unless it's something unique or in an area that's very low investor area, then you're not sort of getting knocked down with applications. Probably the most recent one that I got smashed with was an owner who went $50 below market because that's what she needed, and she was happy with a lower rent. And I had 22 people through within 30 minutes. But that was price related. That wasn't because there was no homes available in the area. It was because it was $50 below market. So that's what sort of helped to rent that one quickly and increase the popularity on it. So.
And if nothing more than people that watch these webinars, to take that away, that what the media reports is general and the importance of being specific with property
Yeah.
managers is that's how we develop, trust in the industry and all of that. So I think that's been a massive takeaway from all of these sessions. So I've had, I don't know if this is going to work. I'm just going to quickly press something and just go answer. Oh no, I was going to say answer live, but I don't know how that works. But I've had, okay, so I've got a couple of questions here. I've
Yeah.
got Julie, who was the lady I was just referring to. She said, yes, I've had this conversation around how the changes to property management laws in different states can impact their investors' returns. Pat made a great point on investors not having control of their investment. That can mean unexpected costs due to PM changes. And then Kelly said, great session, very raw and real challenges that New South Wales property managers and landlords are facing, especially highlighting the new legislation hurdles we need to navigate. No questions, more just some input that I agree that periodic leases may be the best for the landlord going forward, as a tenant needs to provide the 21 days notice as opposed to a fixed lease where tenants can break their lease with no or minimal notice.
Yeah.
So just interesting, as an investor, speak to your property manager and navigate that as some different options of what you've got, because I know that for me, so many investors are like no to periodic leases. And I'm like, periodic leases really are not a big problem. I actually find that they're actually a little bit easier sometimes because you don't have to muck around with stuff.
Yeah. I guess the flip side for the periodic is your insurance and what it will actually cover.
Yeah.
So that seems to be a bit of an issue. But yeah, it's sort of when originally the lease break fee was so this is going back 23 years when I started. A tenant paid rent up until such time as a new tenant was found, plus any advertising costs. And then I
That's
came
WA.
into
That's what we still do.
Okay, so then a few years back, it changed to if it was in the first half of your lease, you paid 4 weeks break fee, and in the second half, you paid 2 weeks, which I thought was a lot fairer because I had owners who would just reject applications because they knew that tenant had to pay up until the end of the lease. And you also couldn't increase the rent above what the existing tenant was paying. Then when the lease break 4 and 2 came in, you could put the rent to market, and the tenants just paid rent until the keys were returned, plus the 4 or 2 weeks. And 4 weeks is obviously a lot more of a deterrent than 2 weeks or even 1 week. And then when it changed to this sliding scale, it was just it's so easy just to get out of your lease, just with the hey 1 week and you don't have to give a notice period. Like you could literally secure a new home, do your clean and everything, hand your keys in, pay rent till that day, and here's 1 week. So you're not out of pocket. It's not a penalty in my opinion, to stop someone from breaking the lease. So
Yeah, really interesting. A question's come through. I'm not sure if this is an area. It says, how does the growth look like at Rutherford and Kurri? Is it a good time to invest? Just need the info from the person who's on the ground. Is that an area that you're familiar with?
yeah, so I'm actually a Rutto boy or Rutherford, from when I grew up. So it's where you get miners, they'll rent in that area. It is a lower return than say East Maitland or Ashtonfield, but that's because it's on, the west side of town. It's a bit further from the coast. But that's where you'll get something even between 600 and 700 for an older 3 bedroom weatherboard. And for a 3 bedroom home, you're looking, depending on the inclusions, anywhere from 500 to 600 a week return. There is a lot more land available over there to be developed. You've got suburbs like Farley around Rutherford. So, you haven't got that same scarcity that you do on the east side. So you might not see the same capital growth on that side, but there's definitely housing that's needed in our area. So yeah, Rutherford, Kurri, it's right on the expressway. So again, it's one of those suburbs where, you're 20, 30 minutes between Newcastle and 20, 30 minutes the other way to the Hunter Valley. But all these suburbs, they're sort of like satellite suburbs. So Rutherford's got a Coles, a Woolworths, an IGA. You don't actually, you might not work in the area, but when you come home, you've got everything you need there. You've got schools, you've got shops. So you don't necessarily have to venture too far on a weekend to go and get this and that sort of things. So, and same with Kurri, you're not far from the shops. So there's a lot of different sort of, yeah, I'd call them a satellite suburb where you leave for work and then you come home and you don't have to go too far to get the essentials. So,
You didn't mention like McDonald's and KFC and all of that. Is that classed as an essential as well?
so yeah, so there's quite a lot of takeaways in Rutherford. From I was doing business coaching a lot of years ago, and apparently the Domino's in Rutherford was the highest grossing store in Australia. So
Wow.
yeah, I don't know what that tells about the suburb, no comment. But yeah, like for takeaways and stuff, as everything's there. If you don't have to cook dinner, you can easily get your hands on something.
So, okay, so yeah, so Rutherford, there's still quite a bit of land. So, like you said, long term, there's always going to be housing, which
Yeah,
I guess we find that the rental growth really booms when there's not any stock available. So,
yeah, that's right.
so that's just definitely going to be sort of a factor to think about. But then on the other hand, I guess it's sometimes I disclaim this. This is just a personal thought. That the it's really important to, as an investor, to know how long you're going to be holding on to a property. Because I guess if you're looking for that sort of quick, growth, you're not going to sometimes get it in those areas. But, if you hold on to something long enough, there's always some sort of growth there. So that's
Yeah.
just something to keep in mind. But I think as well, like if it sounds like there is money in the area if there's FIFO and double income and things like that. So I would hope that the natural rental growth will be consistent, will consistently grow as time goes on as well. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether you see like a massive amount of defaults or anything like that, or is that all pretty okay?
Yeah, so we've obviously seen a huge increase in rent returns in the last 4 years. So, for example, you like I said, like a three bedroom, you're getting just above 500 a week now across the board, and previously, it might have been 350 a week 5, 6 years ago. So you've got that increase. I think people have just adjusted to the rent increases. So. But that said, it was probably between 3 and 350 for 5 years. So, when you say markets go up and down, then they plateau. So the actual growth over that 10, 15-year term has probably been averaging 10 or $20 per week, which, would be, I guess, pretty normal. So instead of going up 10 or 15 or $20 per week over that period, it's gone up, $10 a week and then nothing. And then it's gone up, $50 to $100 a week, sort of in the last 2, 3 years. But I also found that when interest rates were really, really low and we were doing rent reviews, I had a lot of owners who didn't want to push the rent. They said, a lot said just leave it, and others said let's just go 10 or $20 instead of the 30 or 50 that the market's telling us. And then obviously when people's rates have come off the fixed good times, that's when they've sort of gone, hey, we need to increase these rents now. So instead of sort of putting it up consistently, they've sort of done the right thing by the tenant and saying, I don't need that much money, so let's keep them happy. And then all of a sudden it's sort of, okay, I need to claw back some of that increase now to be able to hold on to the property. So
But then they look like the asshole when they do it all in one
yeah,
lump.
yeah,
That's the problem. That's what I say to owners. Like, it's no point being nice, is it? Just do those
no,
gradual ones as you go along, because they forget those 3 years that they've been under market rate,
yeah.
and just with increase. And then and just out of curiosity, if it's around that 500 per week mark, do you know what that affordability percentage is for applicants at the moment?
Yeah, so it's definitely increased how much income tenants need to pay on rent. So, it used to be around that 25 to 30%, and now it's sort of pushing that 40%.
Even with the FIFOs and the all that
Oh,
work.
so we don't really have, because the mines are local, we don't have FIFO work. They just drive.
Oh, so it's
Yeah.
not like the super duper money.
No, it's decent, 140 to 180 someone can earn.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, it's not yeah, the sort of, I don't know, not as great
200%.
as what it could be. Yeah, because we're just too far from the mines over your way for people to travel. It's 4 hours to fly across there, and then you've got to drive to Sydney, so you've got 2 hours there. So you're really wasting 2 days if you're doing FIFO just in travel, and you'd be absolutely wrecked by the time you arrived at each destination. So
So creeping up to the 40% is pretty significant,
yeah,
isn't it? Like you wouldn't want it to grow any more than that at the moment, because that's really pushing it.
yeah, definitely. So I'm finding that the bigger homes, if I've got a 5 bedroom, you'll find that maybe a grandparent might move in with the family. So instead of paying, 300 a week for a 1 bedroom and then 600, 700 for a 4 bedroom, so combined $1,000 a week, they're sort of spending between 700 and 800, and then sharing those, utility costs as well. And I guess you've got babysitting. Adds advantages as well. So that's what I'm sort of seeing. Anything that's 5 bedroom is very popular, but we've also got a lot of dual locks. A lot of people are doing granny flats in our area, but even like a 2 bedroom granny flat that's limited to 64 square meters. We're getting between 4 and 450 a week for those, depending on, if they've got a carport or a garage and that sort of thing. So I think even one bedrooms, I haven't got any one bedrooms that I manage currently, but they're sort of around that 350 a week. So when you sort of look at a one bedroom at 350, or you can get a four bedroom, two bathroom, two living, double garage for 700, it makes sense to combine households. But obviously you've got to find somebody that you could live with. So that becomes the challenge or the hurdle at that point. Yeah, we want to save money, but can we
We want to say
live under
staying at
one
the same
roof?
time.
Yeah,
It's a fine line, isn't it?
definitely.
All right, and to finish up, again, this is just your personal preference. If you were on the market as an investor to buy a rental property, where would you buy? How much would you spend? And
Yeah.
sort of, yeah, what would that look like?
So for me, the suburbs Bora Heights, and Largs, you'll get in there for between 7 and 900,000, and probably you'll get a higher rent. So Bora Primary School has got a very good reputation, and if I've had to give a tenant notice to vacate for whatever reason, they'll actually downgrade and or downsize in property to stay in the zoning for that school. And then you've obviously got the suburbs on the east side. So you've got East Maitland, Ashtonfield, um, even Metford. So Metford's quite close to our new hospital. So we've had a lot of people, a lot of nursing staff who've relocated from different areas, and that they want to be, in a lot of cases, walking distance to the hospital or only a short drive. So those sort of areas have seen a really big increase since the hospital opened. It'll be about 3 years ago because our eldest son was born at the new hospital. So, yeah, so that sort of brought people into the area and pushed those prices up. But yeah, it's an area where there's pockets in every suburb that you'd sort of stay away from. And you only have to drive down the street to sort of realize why. But that's where, having a property manager on the ground is really helpful because like I've lived here my whole life. So I just sort of, so Rutherford, where I grew up, has got a stigma and people are like, oh, Rutherford. And I'd be like, I don't have a problem with it. Yes, there's certain streets and I can rattle off the names, but you just don't go into those, you don't look in those areas to buy or to rent. You sort of go elsewhere. It could literally be you're sharing a back fence with a street that you wouldn't live in, but on this side of the fence, you're all hunky-dory sort of thing. So,
Well, you look
um,
half decent, so it can't be that bad.
no, that's right. So, yeah, it's one of those areas where you just have certain pockets where you'd stay away from. I actually had a existing client contact me last week, and he's looking to purchase again. And he said, I thought I'd reverse engineer it. So rather than go and find something and say, hey, I've bought this for you to manage, I might get you in to begin with. I said, so send me the links and I'll give you the feedback. Because at the end of the day, I want a management to be easy to find a tenant, easy to maintain. And if I can sort of be involved in that process, that makes his job easier because it might, you know, even if it's for an investment, there's still that emotional investment in buying something. Whereas I go in, pretty clinically as a property manager and like, bang, bang, you need to do this and that. Or I wouldn't go there,
Yeah.
So that sort of, yeah, it very much helps, I think, in the whole process and gives them extra confidence. So I've done it myself. I own a duplex in Queensland, and I bought it during COVID, so obviously couldn't get there. And I had a friend being in the industry who went and looked at it and rang me and said, probably need to do this, that, and the other. The tenants look after it, blah, blah, blah. I'd be happy to manage it. And that's how I bought that property. So having experience buying something sight unseen with tenants already in possession, I feel like, I can sort of help a client on the other side as the property manager to guide them in what would be a good investment or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I just purchased, I don't know if I ever told you, but my principal place where I live now, I bought that sight unseen. I,
Yeah.
I only live well, like I work 5 minutes away from it, but I thought, no, I'm going to practice what I preach and I'm going to go buy it. And the poor agent, who was so worried, he was like, Ash, are you sure? I was like, can I use the front lounge room as a bedroom? He's like, yes. I said, that's all I want to know. I
Yeah.
said, put the offer through and it worked out for me. But it's one of those things that my favorite thing to say is you can absolutely buy a property without seeing it, but you can't buy confidently without having someone on your team having a look. So that's really what it's about. It's just that buying with confidence. It's not
Yeah.
about just buying something. And that's what, that's where property managers can help with. That's been wonderful. I know we spoke a bit on legislation today, probably more than what I do in other sessions, but I just think it's really, really important. And I think, that's something for people to just continuously remember that it is different, and to trust the property manager with some things like maybe stay on periodic, whether I should do fixed. Like you don't know those questions to have unless you physically, you don't know what you don't know. So at least hopefully that's just given that little bit of extra info to the investors that are investing in New South Wales. So thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time as always, and we'll do another one in 6 months and sort of see how everything changes and go from there. And for those that are watching, we are sort of going around Australia. So I think next week we've got Darwin from memory, which will be interesting because I'm hearing little talks about Darwin here and there, and it's a little bit of a sleepy place. It's not really talked about much. So I look forward to hearing a bit more about what's happening at that end of Australia.
Cool.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I'll chat to you soon.
No worries. Thanks, Ash.
Hold on. Let me just check. There was no more question. Oh, no, that was just Kel. Okay, easy done. All right. Chat to you soon. Bye, guys.
Bye.